My name is Big Ben Richardson. I'm a musician. I've been a musician all my life, and I've also been a tour manager and sound man for different artists. And you're listening to Talkin' Blues.
I'm curious about the different roles you've played, whether it be front of a house engineer or sound man or a bassist
Yeah.
or tour manager. I presume that first and foremost you're a bassist, or
Yeah.
how do you picture yourself at this point in your life?
Well, at this point, I don't know where the hell I am, but I started as a bass player, and or actually, I grew up in Montreal, and I had a really good friend. He was a guitar player, and I just loved music. I went to see Johnny Winter play at the Montreal Forum in 1973, May of 1973, and it just blew my mind. I was 12 years old, and I went with this friend of mine, and I can't believe my parents actually let me go. But it just blew my mind. And then after that, I just became a total Johnny Winter fanatic. And in November of 1973, I went to see Edgar Winter at the Montreal Forum. And that was another mind blowing experience. He had the Edgar Winter group with Frankenstein, was going crazy. And this is a funny little story, too. But, I remember standing on our seats in the second row, front and center, just watching this show and watching Edgar Winter play Frankenstein and just like, wow, this is incredible. And you fast forward 30 years to 2003, and I was playing bass with Jeff Healy, and he had a club in Toronto, and his club, he would do regular Thursday night there, and he would usually bring in a special guest. Sometimes it would be local, and other times it would be people that he knew from. And one day he brought in Edgar Winter, and I got to play Frankenstein with Edgar Winter. I was standing behind Edgar Winter going, going, you could just kill me now. you know, this is it. I have achieved everything I could possibly want to achieve. I'm playing Frankenstein with Edgar Winter.
That's
so,
fantastic.
so yes, I am a bass player, and I started out in Montreal. I started playing guitar, and then I uh, ended up in Ottawa, and I was still a guitar player, but I was in one of those situations where we had too many guitar players, and so I just kind of picked up a bass and realized after a while I'm a way better bass player than I am a guitar player. So I just kind of stuck to bass, and then kind of grew up and started my career in 1980 with some Ottawa local bands and played around and then and ended up in Saints and Sinners. Me and Tony D started a band called Saints and Sinners. He had actually had a band called Saints and Sinners before that, but we started a new group and it was called Saints and Sinners. And I played in Saints and Sinners with Tony from 83 till about the end of 86.
Saints and Sinners
And
from the Johnny Winter album, Saints and Sinners?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it was, I think Tony originally got that name from the Johnny Winter record. And, but we became, a pretty popular blues band in Ottawa, and we were kind of one of the top bands. There was the Blue Angels, there was Back Alley John. There was a bunch of good blues bands in Ottawa, but we became almost the house band at the Rainbow. We had a blues jam there every Wednesday and stuff, and we toured a little bit around. We would go down to London, and we ended up playing at a week at Albert's Hall, and so we were kind of at our kind of zenith of where we were ever going to be in Ottawa. And at one point, I had three friends that I had lived with in a house: Jerome Godbout, Joe Toole, and Gregory Ray Tunis. And they had the year before, so in '86, they had moved up to Toronto to start a band. That was their whole thing. They started the band. They said, "We're going to go to Toronto. We're going to make it." And they went up to Toronto and they started a band called the Phantoms. And at the time, I think Rob Meisner, who was Amanda Marshall's boyfriend, was the he ended up becoming Amanda Marshall's boyfriend, and he was in the band as a bass player, but he kind of got homesick and he ended up moving back to Ottawa, and I just happened to be in Toronto at the time, and actually I think we were playing with Albert's Hall with Saints and Sinners, and we were staying at their house because we were all good friends, and they needed a bass player, and I just thought, this would be great because I was really into writing original music, and Tony was less into that. So our kind of deal was, I said, I'll play all the blues you want if you play my original stuff, and that's how we worked for about 3 years. And then I ended up moving up to Toronto and at the end of '86 to join the Phantoms, and I was with the Phantoms.
Okay, so let me go back a little ways. First of all, Johnny Winter concert. Did Slade open up for that?
No, it was that concert was King Crimson.
Wow, because I think I saw that tour. I think it might have been the Still Alive and Well tour. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Or was it the Saints and Sinners tour? One of those two.
I think it was the Still Alive and Well tour. It was funny because on that tour, he had his wife playing tambourine, Susan, who later became his wife. And she played tambourine, and he was doing all kinds of wacky stuff, sticking his guitar between her legs. But he also, on that night, I don't know how long it went on for. I don't think it went on for very long, maybe a few dates or something. But he had an old friend of his from Texas named Jimmy Gillen, who was a drummer. And apparently Jimmy had fallen on hard times somehow. And Johnny said, well, come play with me. So there was two drummers.
Wow.
So it was two drummers, Randy Joe Hobbs on bass, Johnny Winter on guitar, and Susan playing tambourine. And apparently that lineup played. There's a picture of them playing on Midnight Special, but apparently Johnny was so crazy and like sticking the guitar and grabbing her boobs and stuff that apparently Midnight Special said this is too risque for us, and they never aired it, and the footage has never been found. Anyway, that's just a little trivia.
All right, so the other question is, when you played guitar and decided to switch to bass, which is not an unfamiliar story, at what point did you think, I'm good at this? Like, what point did you think, well, I am better as a bassist than a guitar player?
Well, the thing is that I was really cocky when I was a kid, like most kids are. And I was defined. I was a guitar player. In high school, I was a guitar player, had a flying V, and I'd play the assemblies and stuff. But I'd listen to it back, and I just wasn't very good. I was like a terrible soloist. Like, I couldn't solo to save my life. Like, I still have tapes of that, and I listen, I go, oh my God, that's so bad. And yet I thought I was great, And so it was about 1978, 79 that I took up the bass.
And then what made you think that you were a good bass player?
I don't know. I just thought I was good at everything. Like when you're a kid, you don't even think about stuff like that. You're just like, this is what I'm doing, and I'm doing it. Like, just to be able to do it was incredible, And it was funny because my first band I was ever in was a band called Blue Currant Preserve, and it was all these friends of mine from school, and there was a guy. His name's Kurt Walther. You probably know Kurt.
No, actually, I don't.
From Ottawa. He's a bass player, curly hair, and he played with Drew Nelson for years. And anyway, he was supposed to be the bass player, and he ended up getting some kind of weird job going to cook in Italy. Being a cook in Italy, and he split for the summer, and all of a sudden my friends were like, well, we don't have a bass player, do you want to play bass with us? And I was like, yeah. And it was kind of a jazz fusion band, and I knew nothing about jazz or fusion or any of that stuff, but we just played, and we did one song with vocals that I sang terribly, and but we had a house, and we started this little music co-op, and Tony's band at the time was High Society. They were part of the co-op, and there was a few other bands that were part of the co-op. And the whole reason was that we had this big living room, and we had it all set up for rehearsal, and anybody that was in the co-op could rehearse. and pay us a tiny bit of money for our rent.
Wow.
And we put on street dances, and it was a really cool thing. It was actually run by Todd Beale, who's a sax player from Ottawa. He lives down in Halifax now.
So by the time you moved to Toronto to join the Phantoms, well, I guess you joined the Phantoms, then moved, I guess. But
Yeah.
at this point, you thinking your career is in music?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ever since I saw that Johnny Winter concert, my career was in music. That was all I cared about, all I did and thought about. I quit high school because we were playing the assembly in the auditorium, the lunchtime assembly, and I'd spent like $100 at the time to bring in this PA, and I had it all worked out. We were going to play Purple Haze. This is when I was still playing guitar. We were going to play Purple Haze, and I bought all this dry ice, and I worked it all out with the text. It was going to be the last song, and we're going to play Purple Haze. And when it comes, you hit the dry ice and put on the purple light. And we had 6 songs. And on the 4th song, the assembly was running late. And on the 4th song, they closed the curtain after our 4th song before we could get to Purple Haze. And I just quit school immediately. I was like, that's it. I'm out of here. If they're not going to support me in what I want to do, I'm done. And I
Wow.
quit school like months before I was supposed to get my diploma. So it was all, but
Okay,
that's,
so if we go back to that time where you quit school and you knew you wanted to be in the music business, or maybe to the point where you decided to join the Phantoms, what did you imagine that to be? What was your hope that you would accomplish musically or as a career?
I just wanted to be a rock star, you know. I wasn't really thinking about any of that stuff. I was like, I'm going to be like Johnny Winter. I'm going to be, a rock star. And I just, I loved blues and, playing with Tony. And, I had a relationship with Dutch Mason, Jeff Arsenault, who's a famous or infamous drummer from down east, down in Halifax. He's an excellent, excellent drummer. He was in that first band I was in. And I remember saying to him one time, I don't know anything about blues, and he said, well, if you want to learn about blues, here's the record. He gave me Dutch Mason, The Blues Ain't Bad, who has Fish Fancy is one of the best bass players in the world as far as I'm concerned. And that's how I learned how to play, was through Dutch Mason. And then with Tony in Saints and Sinners, actually it was before Saints and Sinners, I can't remember exactly, but it was in '83, and we got the gig to open for Dutch at the Oak Ridge Inn, which was at the corner of Sunnyside and Bank. They had a club underneath called Faces, but they had the Oak Ridge Inn on top, and Dutch played there, and we opened up for him and started talking to him. And next thing you know, you say, "Let's get that opening up, guys. Come up on stage and play with me." And he was just such a wonderful guy, and I started a long relationship with me and Dutch Mason. I ended up producing a record for him and doing all kinds of
What
stuff.
was that like? I mean, for people who don't know, Dutch Mason was considered the prime minister of Canadian
Yeah,
blues. But what was
yeah.
it like for this young kid who wanted to learn blues to actually produce one of his albums and work with
It
him?
was amazing. I mean, by this time, Dutchy had lost. This was later in Toronto. It was about 1990, and he'd lost his hands. He had really bad gout. He couldn't play guitar anymore. He could only sing, and he hadn't made a record in years. And he had this friend of his, Don Potter, who Dutchy would always stay with when he'd come up to Toronto. He'd stay with Don for 2 weeks at a time. They'd play Alberts Hall, and Don had this idea he was going to make a live record of Dutch at Alberts Hall. And I guess what happened was the band found out about it, the band that Dutchy had hired, and they started asking Don for a bunch of more money to be on the recording, which is totally understandable.
Right.
But Donnie at the time had gone out and borrowed $3,000, which the recording company he was looking at had told him would cost to record a couple of nights or something. He didn't have any extra money. He wasn't really super rich or anything. And he called me and he was freaking out. And I said, well, Donnie, I said, why are you even making a live record? Don, Dutchy just plays all the same old songs. Why don't we make a new record? He hasn't had a new record. We'll make some new songs. And he was like, yeah, okay, well, I got $3,000. And I said, okay, fine. And I went to a local studio that I knew, and I said, I'll give you $3,000 and we got to make this record. And they were like, okay. And then I talked all the musicians into doing it for free. I did the whole thing for free. I didn't get a penny out of it. But we made this record, and basically what I do is when Dutchie came to town, I kind of went over some songs with him, went over some keys, and then after he left town, I recorded all the music with all the musicians. And then the next time he came back to town, we did all his vocals. And it was pretty cool, I got three of the songs mixed and they sounded fantastic. And I sent them off to Holger Peterson, who I knew quite well. And Holger just called me and said, I want to put this record out. It's great. So
Had you
we put it out. And yeah.
had you done much production work at that before that time?
Well, I was really into studios and so I was always angling to get in on the recording. If there was a local band recording, I'd say, I could help with this, and so I had a few relationships with different studios and stuff. But in 1982, to go back a little further, I was in this band called Trigger that I'd found through the newspaper. I'd quit a band and I was looking for a new band, and I found this band in the paper, and they weren't very good. It was all covers, and they did all, like, back in the day you had the Ottawa circuit, which was all these bands playing hard rock covers, basically,
Right.
and that's what these guys did. And we had a PA. We used to have to carry this big, massive PA, and we had a sound guy. And, if you just played around Ottawa and the blues scene, you'd never run into sound guys or any of that. You just, the small PA, you set it up yourself. But this guy, we had the full on thing, the big board, and everything was mic'd. And one day I just was looking at the sound guy during sound check. And I said, how does this all work? And he just showed me in one session, like about an hour. He said, well, this is how it all works. You come in here and you do this and you blah, blah, blah. And he showed me how to do it. And so I was like, okay, I got to get it. I want to be a sound guy. I love doing sound as well, and my first gig was mixing Melwood Cutlery. Melwood hired me to do his sound at the Saucy Noodle in Ottawa. And that's how I started doing sound. And then I eventually bought a PA. This is all in between 83 and 86. I bought a small PA and started hiring myself out as a sound man. And that's how I became a sound guy.
Wow, so that started pretty early then.
Yeah, I was 22, I think. Or
Okay,
21.
so is there a huge difference between being a sound guy, front of house, and controlling the live sound versus recording an album, being the sound guy at a production studio?
Yeah, there's a big difference, which is you're basically, like, this is the thing. I love doing sound, and I did it for years and years and years. And then I got into the studio thing, and it was kind of fun, to do that. But then what I did was I started Liquid with Alec
Hmm.
Fraser. And I basically put up most of the money for that. And he, we had this partnership where I basically just said, okay, well, you know, you just make records and pay me, for our expenses and stuff. And we kind of shared it. And the thing is that, you're in a basement and you're recording and you're in there for 12 or 14 hours, and it gets really, really hard. And the other thing is I found out about recording is that, it's like, okay, we're going to do a guitar solo now. Okay, so the guy would play the solo. How was that? I say, well, okay, let's do another take. And 40 takes later, how was that? Well, it was about just as fucking shitty as excuse me, language, as shitty as your last 40 takes, So it got to the point where I kind of realized I don't actually like being in the studio that much, because it's just, I don't have, like, Alec Fraser is an awesome producer, and he loves
Hmm.
doing it. He loves doing it. For me, live sound is great because once you've done it, it's gone.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just it's a thing. It happens. You make a mistake, it doesn't matter. It's gone. But at the same time, you're sitting there in front of however many, 5,000 people with this massive sound system, and you're the guy that makes it sound like the record, you know? So I love it in that respect. But the whole sitting there and going over everything with a fine tooth comb, that's not really what I discovered after I spent all this money on a studio that I just didn't like it that much, you
Well,
know?
that's interesting. But you still love the live front of the house gig. That's
Yeah.
what you still do.
Yeah, I still do sound and I still love it as much as ever, and it's getting harder now because of course, as you get older, you tend to lose some of your hearing. But I've still got it, I still do local gigs in Austin and at the Continental Club, and people are like, "Oh, it sounds great tonight," and "Oh, so glad you're back doing sound," So
So, what does your experience of being a bass player for various bands like the Phantoms, or like Jeff Healey, what does that experience give you to prepare you for a front of the house sound guy?
I don't know. I mean, I think just being a musician is a big thing because, because you can really hear the parts, like a person who's not a musician doesn't necessarily hear the parts that's, separately. And I always found that, like in Ottawa, a lot of the guys that work for Wall Sound, they weren't musicians, they were techs, and they had the technical end of it, but they didn't seem to understand music that well. Like their whole thing was, if I can get this kick drum really rocking, then I got my job's done. Meanwhile, you're listening, going, "Wow, big kick drum. Where's the vocal and where's the guitar? I can't hear it." Like certain mixes you just don't like, and whereas if I'm a musician, as a musician, I know, I understand the music, and also the thing is you have to realize is, people want to hear what they understand. They want to hear the words of the vocals even, they want to hear the words and they want to hear the guitar solos. They don't care what a kick drum sounds like. The average person doesn't give two hoots what a kick drum sounds like. They
Right.
want to they want to see the band, they want to hear the guitar solos, they want to hear the, or a piano solo or whatever's a featured instrument is. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear the vocals, and I, not to toot my own horn, but I've got a pretty good reputation as a sound guy, and it just got to the point as I got into it more and more and more and more and worked with better and better artists, I found myself simplifying, And one day I was in 2001, I was mixing Colin James in Kelowna at this tiny little theater. And I don't know what happened, but I think we were late or something. So I didn't really do a real big sound check or anything. And I didn't touch any of the equalizers on any of the channels. And we did the show and it sounded like $1,000,000. And I just thought, wow, and so that kind of became my new mantra because like what happens, like just to get technical for a sec, if you've got a channel, say the guitar channel, and you mess with the EQ and change the high end and then take off the bottom end and do this and do that and do a bunch of stuff to it, you introduce what's called phase shifting, and that just makes everything sound kind of shittier, you know so then you take that and multiply that by 40 channels. If you're drastically EQing 40 channels, you're introducing so much phase shifting into the whole thing that, it just doesn't. But then again, I don't know. I mean, that's the beauty of sound. There's no one way to do it. Everybody has different ways. But what I found was the less I messed with it, the better it would sound. So if I get a really good mic and put it on a really good amp with a really good guitar and a really good player, I pretty much don't have to do anything to that mic to make it sound good.
Right.
And luckily for me, I was working with, I started working with famous big artists that had their shit together. They had their sounds together, like Colin James, like Jeff Healey, Gordy Johnson. They all had fantastic guitar sounds, and all their, the drummers and the bass players, they all, because they would all spend all the kinds of money to get their sound, and
How how different is it what they hear on stage with the monitors versus what people are hearing in front of the house?
It's totally different, I mean, well, the mix is totally different. I
And
mean,
it's
the
different for each
sound,
person.
yeah. Yeah, because each person has his own mix, which is a speaker in front of them that the monitor engineer is throwing whatever they want into that mix. So, guitar players typically don't want to hear any bass and they don't really care that much about drums and so they basically want them. And most musicians are like that. Vocals especially, they want to hear themselves at a million miles. So that's all monitor, and that's why I've never I have done monitors in certain situations, but the beauty of doing front of house sound is that you're the one who's out there, and it doesn't matter what the artist thinks; they're not out there.
And they have no idea really
They have
what
no
it
idea,
sounds like.
really. I mean, Amanda Marshall used to come out, and she was funny because she wanted it really loud. She hated being pigeonholed as kind of a AOR, sort of a easy listening artist. She considered herself a rock artist, and so she wanted everything super loud. So she would always come out. She'd get going. They do a couple of songs. I get a, mix going. She'd say, "Okay, you got your mix going?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." And then she'd come out to front of house. And invariably, I would have to take the master fader and turn it up for her because otherwise she'd be like, "It's not loud enough," And so I crank it up and it'd be just blowing. Oh my God. And she was like, "Okay, that's good." And then she'd go back on stage and then I'd turn it down because it would be way too loud. And I'm not a quiet sound man. Like I'd make Big Sugar, no problem. I got no problem doing all that.
I have to ask. I saw them at Tower Records for an in-store,
No,
and it was like the loudest thing I've ever heard.
yeah,
Like the whole CD racks were all shaking. They're a
yeah,
loud band.
yeah.
So
I loved loud music. That was the thing. I was a rocker. I really loved, being loud and making it loud. But, there's a certain, the sound guy they had before me, he loved making it loud, but he was a reggae guy. And his whole thing was, well, we have to have the bottom end at least as loud as the guitar. And I've saw a couple of shows of Big Sugar with him mixing where you're just standing there and your chest is just going
exactly.
almost making you sick. And when I actually took over the post, I started getting all kinds of, good reviews from the promoters because they were saying, well, the mix isn't killing people anymore,
Right.
because to me, bottom end is it's perceived. You don't have to have that bottom end cranked up. You just have to make it sound like it's cranked up. It's kind of a weird distinction, but so I would never crank the bottom end as loud as I could get it. I would try and work it around and just so it's not killing people. But at the same time, the whole mix sounds totally full when you've got those, four Marshall cabinets pointing out at the audience, so you're trying to balance that, right? And so it's a very interesting,
How do you prioritize what you do? I mean, you've been a bass player in many different bands. Then you have this reputation as being a sound engineer. Do you have a preference? Like, how does that work in terms of who you work
well,
with and what you do?
I love being a bass player. Like that really is my favorite thing. But I've been super lucky in my life in that until maybe a couple of years ago, I've never even had to look for work. Like I've never looked for work in my life. I've just gone from one thing to the other. And so I mean, the Phantoms, when we broke up, you know, I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm not really sure. And then all of a sudden, this opportunity came up to tour manage Jeff Healey. And I was like, okay, I'll take that. Yeah, I'll do that.
So, how did that opportunity come up? Because were you like the tour manager of the Phantoms? Like, what history
Well,
did you
yeah,
have to?
I mean, I basically ran every band I've ever been in, like Saints and Sinners, all the business, because musicians are notorious for being shitty business guys. And I'm not a great businessman, but I can do books and I'm organized, so I always was the guy. I always was the guy that owned the van, that kind of thing. I'm just the more responsible fellow out of all my different musician people, that I've played with.
Well, so I do want to ask about that. I mean, how, because yes, musicians have a tendency of not being the most business minded.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just kind of fell into it because, well, it's funny with when the Phantoms broke up, I was kind of decimated. I'd spent 10 years of my life on it. I really thought we were going to make it, and through a whole combination of bad business moves and just bad luck, we ended up not being able to play and just people stopped coming to see us. It was, we went from being an extremely popular band for about 5 years in Toronto. We could pack any club in Toronto, and all of a sudden, well, I remember one day, it was in 1993 or 94, we played at Ultrasound in Toronto, and you could not put more than 80 people in Ultrasound. And we only got half the people on a Friday night. And I took the guys aside and I said, we're all going to have to get jobs now because we can't afford to live on, we're just not as popular as we used to be. And I was $40,000 in debt from credit cards and all kinds of stuff, like, from touring across Canada. I put all the gas on the credit card, and then we just never had enough money to keep, So I ended up having to go bankrupt. And I lived in this little 11th floor apartment on Mutual Street, and I went on welfare because I couldn't pay my rent. And I just sat there, and basically for 6 months, should I throw myself off the balcony today or tomorrow? I was really down. And then what happened was Tom Stephen, who was the manager and drummer for the Jeff Healey band, his office manager, Donna, would call me once in a while and say, hey, do you want to make $100 and come by and take the Jeep and go run some errands for me? So I was up there one time, and they'd lost the person that took all the phone calls, the receptionist. They lost a receptionist. And so Donna was having to be the receptionist. It was driving her nuts. And they were going through some kind of slow time. So they hadn't really found a new receptionist. And I said, hey, why don't you hire me for 30 hours a week and I'll be the receptionist and pay me $8 an hour, which will be just a bit more than I'm getting from welfare. And, we'll all be happy. And so she did. And so all of a sudden, I'm now the receptionist for the Jeff Healey Band management office and sitting right there with Donna, who's running the whole show. And it was fantastic to get this whole look at behind the scenes look at how this, they were hugely popular and successful, at how this band worked, from a behind the scenes business end of it. And then what happened was I was doing some gigs this was 1994, and I'd been working at the office for, a few months, maybe 6 months. But I also had been playing some gigs with Big Sugar because Gordy hadn't found a permanent bass player. And I started doing these gigs, and I played on and off with Big Sugar for about 6 months. And it was really fun. I just loved playing it. But we were still trying to get the Phantoms going. We were doing recording. Tom Stephen was recording us in the studio and trying to advise us on how to, do stuff and trying to make a third record. And so we were trying to make this third record. And then I was working at the office with Donna, and I got a phone call from Gordy, and he said, this summer, I'm going out for 6 weeks. I'm touring across the country with Big Sugar. Do you want to play bass? So I went to Donna and I said, look, Donna, I just got this offer to go away for 6 weeks with Big Sugar. And she said, well, she said, if you go away, I won't, you won't have a job when you get back because I'm going to have to hire someone. And right at the same time, Jeff's tour manager and sound man had quit. And so they were looking for a new guy. And I said to Donna, well, I've been doing sound for years and I've run my bands for years. Why don't you hire me to be the tour manager, sound man? They're only doing weekends. So then I could still work at the office in the week, and you hire me to be their guy for the weekends. And that, if you do that, I won't go away, with Big Sugar. And so she said, okay. And that was the first tour manager gig I ever did. They just threw me. I just got thrown in, and I ended up on the cover to cover tour from '94 till the end of '95. We went all over the world and did all kinds of stuff, and it was just fluke. It was kind of a fluke, you know. I just fluked into it, and I said, "Well, I kind of talked her into it. I said, "Well, I won't go away, and you can still have me at the office if you give me this." And she did, and it was fun, you know. It was really fun, and short, you know. And we went through 2 years with Jeff, and we were still trying to do the Phantom thing, you know. Like Tom was with me all the time, and you know, trying to brainstorm how are we going to get you guys going, and then that tour finished in November of '95, and I saved up $12,000. I was like, okay, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to rent a house, and I'm going to start a little studio. That was my whole thing. I wanted to start this studio, which eventually became like, but I rented a house.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Um, when you were sitting there in the office, seeing what the Jeff Healey band was going through at their level, which is pretty high up there,
Yeah. Yeah.
what did you learn? What surprised you about the business of music at their level?
Um, hmm. I don't
Like, what was
know.
it? What was it straightforward? Did you think this is what I think it should be, but bigger?
Well, it was really on. Like the thing with Tom Stephen was he was the guy that he really understood when the opportunity arises, you take it immediately. You don't mess around. And so, you know, we'd go and we do like, you know, go over and do an English tour. And we do 9 shows in a row, you know, and Jeff's fingers would be bleeding and we'd all be dying and stuff. And then it would be like, you know, oh, next thing we got to fly to Japan, you know, and it was just full on, and it worked. Like that was the
Hmm.
thing. I learned so much from Tom, just these little things about how to get around people and how to do stuff. And their whole thing was that, you know, they said right from the get-go, we're not going to let people take advantage of us. We're going to be the people taking advantage of the promoters, you know. And so they always had this real business-like attitude about them. And you know, it didn't matter. I mean, you know, Tom always had my back. Like I could walk up to a promoter and say, "Oh yeah, well, if you don't have that, you know, bottle of booze in the dressing room, there's no show." I could actually say that, and Tom would come out and go, "Yeah, there's no show." You know, he would back me up all the way, and it was a fantastic, like that's how I learned the ropes, was working with him and Donna Zeman, whose mind is like a steel trap. Like she was just fantastic, you know. And and then anyway, oh yeah, so what I was getting to before is once that tour finished, I came and I was going to build this little studio, and you know, in January I get the phone call from Donna. Tom wants to talk to you. Hold on, you know. And Tom came on and says, "Look, I got Amanda Marshall. Her record just came out, and now we got to go over to Europe and do there's a 2 week promo tour and then a 6 weeks across Canada opening for Tom Cochrane. I need someone that knows Europe, Ben. I need you to do this tour." And I was like, I can't do this tour. I just got off the road with you guys. I'm burnt. And, you know, I'm not doing it. No. And, you know, and they just kept on me for a couple of days. Donna kept on me. She'd call me every day and say, "Are you going to do that tour?" And and then one day she said, "Well, how much money you got saved?" I
Sorry,
said,
doing that tour as a musician, as a road
"Tour
manager.
manager."
Okay.
Yeah, as a tour manager, sound guy. You know, and one day she said, "Well, how much money you got?" And I said, "Well, I got 12 grand." She said, "Ah," she goes, "the way you drink, you're gonna whip through that money and you know, no time at all." And so eventually I said, "Okay, I'll do it." I said, "I'll do 8 weeks and then I'm done. I'm you know, then you'll have to find someone else." And so I got on a plane with Amanda Marshall and went out and did this little 8 week run, and I ended up staying just because she was so obsessed with making it. She was so driven. Like when I joined up with Jeff Healey, they were on their fourth record. They never sound checked. They hated doing sound checks. They would never sound check. And it was basically like a ship kind of going this way. You know, it was really hard to get all their massive rider all the time because, you know, their ship was kind of going down, whereas Amanda was going up like this. And she was totally driven. She always wanted a sound check. She wanted to know what the light guy was going to do. And it was kind of a little bit refreshing coming from these jaded guys who were just on tour to make money to Amanda who wanted to have this whole career, and that's how I ended up with Amanda. So I don't know what my point was. But
It's great though. So, did you ever regret passing up on that Big Sugar tour? I know you worked with Gordy afterwards, and you
yeah,
still have a relationship with him, and you play in a band with him or whatever. But as a musician that could have gone on tour versus
you know,
learning this new trade, and I guess that's also given you many opportunities since then, right? Being a road manager.
yeah, yeah. Well, that was the thing. It was just kind of like I loved playing. The first gig I did with Big Sugar, we showed up. The drummer had been with them for 6 weeks, and I knew the material better than the drummer did. And there was one point where Gordy was playing a slow blues, and he went and he did this. It's kind of like a double turnaround thing at the end, kind of a thing that Morgan Davis would do. And I knew exactly where he was going, and I just went right there with him, and his head just went like this, and he looked at me, and I just looked at him, and I said, "I got you, I got you." And the other thing was we had, so I did that gig, and Gordy was like, "Fucking great, man." He goes, "You know the stuff better than the drummer." He ended up firing the drummer after that. And we got another drummer who was fantastic, Skeeto Valdez, I think his name is. He's from Detroit. And he was a black dude. And he was kind of like a cross between Mitch Mitchell and Louis Belson or something like that. He was fabulous drummer. And we went and we did this gig. It was in the Purple Onion or something in Oshawa. And this was when 500 Pounds had just come out and it was starting to go up. And Gordy had just kind of gotten into the whole guitar, really loud guitar thing. And we were playing the Purple Onion, and he'd always start with I'm a Ram and end with Ride Like Hell. So we started with I'm a Ram and played and did some stuff. And then all of a sudden he went Ride Like Hell. And I'm like, why are we doing Ride Like Hell now? We've only been playing for like half an hour. We came off, and I looked at Skeeto. I said, "What's going on? Why? You know why he stopped?" And Skeeto's like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "We've only been playing for half an hour." And Skeeto's like, "No, we've been playing for 2 hours." And I was like, "What? We've been playing like really?" I thought we'd be only like that's how much I loved it. It was we just had this instantaneous musical connection. But the thing was, the only reason I didn't join was because Tom was still trying to get the Phantoms going. We were still trying to make this third record. And I'm just a loyal guy. At that point, we were 8 years in with the Phantoms. And I really wanted to do it, to make the Phantoms happen. I spent so much time. So, Gordy did ask me to join. And I was like, I'd love to join. There's nothing I'd love more, but I can't leave the guys. And then I think Rob Meisner did that tour across Canada. And he didn't really work out. He wasn't heavy enough for Gordy. And the next bass player was Gary Lowe, who came in. And, so sometimes I've wondered, should I have done that? But then then you think, well, Gary Lowe is such an integral part of that
Mm-hmm.
band too. And me and Gary were really good friends. And, he was a fantastic bass player. Just getting to mix those guys night after night and watch Gary Lowe play was great. But that's why I didn't join. It was just because my loyalty to my old band.
It
And I
also
couldn't.
speaks volumes that when Gary passed away, that you did fill in, right?
Right.
Like you
Yeah.
replaced him for that
Yeah.
tour. I don't know if this is a fair question because I know it's complex, but Phantoms were really hot in the heyday,
Yeah.
and it was probably one of those bands that you think was going to make it.
Yeah.
Having gone through and worked with other people who've done quite well, like Amanda Marshall and Jeff Healey and Big Sugar, is there anything about what you saw in those bands that you thought, well, this is why these people have made it, and maybe not the Phantoms? Or is that totally
Yeah,
an unfair question?
no, it's focus. It's really all about focus. With the Phantoms, we were so diverse, and we never really wrote great songs, because of our diversity. I know we wrote a few good songs, but overall, we just weren't. It just wasn't meant to be. We had, Jove Toole was fantastic guitar player,
Hmm.
but he was very his own man. Like if you tried to tell him what to do or play, he just tell you to screw off, and it was the same with Jerome. We had it was an incredible live band. We all loved to play, and we were all good players, but it just didn't work out recording wise, And so here's the 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 topper of this whole thing is, when I started working with Amanda Marshall, and we went over on that first 2 week promo tour, there was a guy with us, or he joined us there. His name's Richard Zuckerman, and he worked for Sony. And he'd signed a bunch of bands. He was kind of a legendary guy. He was an English guy, and he was basically in charge of Amanda, kind of helping her do her thing. And he's a super nice guy, Richard is. And anyway, I found myself sitting on the plane with him on the way back, and we had all these demos that we'd made with the Phantoms. And the thing with Tom Stephen, he'd said to us, you have to co-write, and your songs aren't strong enough, which he was true. We have to get really good songs. You have to co-write. And we tried co-writing with Mo Berg. We tried with a guy from Platinum Blonde, Mark Holmes. We did a bunch of co-writing and stuff. And we recorded using Tom's engineer, and everything kind of sounded a little bit generic, But at the time, we didn't think that at all. Anyway, so I'm sitting there on the plane coming back from Europe with Richard Zuckerman, and he says, and I said to him, I said, Richard, you're a record guy. Can you listen to my demos? Like, just listen to 3 or 4 songs if you don't mind. Let me know what you think. Yeah, no problem. He puts on the thing. He listens to 3 songs, and he pulls them headphones out, and he goes, look, he said, I know the Phantoms. He said, I used to go see you guys at the Diamond all the time. He said, this doesn't sound like the Phantoms. This sounds like any generic rock band. And I just thought, that's why I hate all this shit. Really, because we were compromising what we liked, like I didn't like writing songs with Mark Holmes, I didn't like the bass lines he came up with. But we did it because we just felt, well, if this is what we got to do, then we'll do it. But after Richard said that, I just went, he's totally right. Like, this is not what we're about. This is not what the Phantoms were about. I don't know what the Phantoms, how you could ever, make that happen, but this is not it. And that was the day I decided that's it for the Phantoms. And the next day I called a meeting and I said, look, I'm not into this anymore. I quit. And Joe, the guitar player, said, you beat me to it. I was going to quit. So that's what happened with the Phantoms, 96 that was. And, we'd been together for 10 years. And meanwhile, it was, I was off with Amanda, so I wasn't going to be around anyway. And it just seemed like, after Richard had said that about it, and it kind of confirmed everything I thought about those songs, that I just didn't like them, and why would I want to be in a band writing songs that I hate?
But I can't
Yeah.
imagine how. I mean, I would imagine it's very difficult for a band to be good and to be able to be captured properly as to who they are. Like it
Yeah.
seems like that would
I
be
mean,
easy, but I
I
would
didn't
think that
hate
it's
all
not.
the songs. I didn't hate all the
Oh no, no,
songs.
I
Some of them I
understand
liked,
that.
but anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
But just to be able to capture the essence of that band
Yeah.
in song form, a great band that's great live, it just seems like it's not as easy as you would think it would be.
No, it's extremely hard, I mean, trying to, get good songs and tell some 25-year-old band that that can pack the diamond any night of the week that your song is not that good. It's tough, and it's tough to accept that from someone. But we were dumb, we had so much self-confidence, and we were offered Island Records,
Hmm.
a Canadian deal, and it was a small deal, but that's exactly the type of deal that U2 took, right? U2 took a small Island Records deal, and Island Records didn't give them a whole pile of money off the bat. They developed them and gave them enough money to tour across the world. And that's what we should have done. We should have just taken we didn't take it because it was too small a deal, you know, and we should have taken it. And I mean, as soon as those island people saw us play, we would have been like, yeah, let's promote this band. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
and, you know, if we'd said, like, let's get a really good producer, you know, Island would have gone, okay, who do you want? And we would, let's find someone that produces music that we is like us and we like. If we'd done that, then we probably could have made a good record, you know, but we didn't. We hired local, we hired Kevin, and I'm not putting any of these guys down or anything, but, Billy Bryan's was produced half a record, and then we didn't like what he was doing. And we ended up with Kevin, somebody who was an engineer at Sounds Interchange. And we were basically producing it ourselves.
Right.
But we should have just let go and said, let's put it in this guy's hands and listen to what he has to say and make a great record. But we didn't. That's what U2 did.
Right.
And we could have done that maybe. But then again, when I think about Jerome and I think about Joe, I don't know, and me and Greg,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. So,
So you take
retrospect,
this other path and you become a tour manager
you
and
know,
also do sound, and you start working for other people. How does that happen that you're working front of house sound for various artists? Does that just come from
well, it just
reputation?
Yeah, I mean, most of it just came from the fact that I was best friends with Tom Steven. And so anybody that he wanted me to do. So Amanda Marshall, I worked for her for 5 years, and I was super happy doing it. But it kind of became after a while, like the thing is, I loved the sound part of it. And what I should have done is concentrated on sound and just said, I'm not going to tour manage anymore in retrospect. But tour managing is fun in a way, but once you learn how to do it, then it just becomes like babysitting. It's really,
Yeah.
like my thing with tour managing was like, how many times do I have to call a limo company and tell them what time to get the limo here? Because you'd be sitting there and waiting for a limo. I'd made all the arrangements. I'd called them and faxed them or whatever had to be done, but for some reason it wasn't there. That's kind of encapsulates for me the whole tour manager thing. It's like, why isn't the limo here? I've done my job, but people screw up all the time, and so you're constantly just putting out fires, and you've done it a million times. So I'm not a big fan of tour managing. I still do it because I have to for a living, but most managers want a sound guy and a tour manager in the same thing. So I did Amanda Marshall from 96 till, 2000. I did her. She was my main gig. In the middle of that, I got a call from Big Sugar's manager, and they had a sound guy, Jeff Holdip, who was just a reggae guy. And he hated tour managing. He didn't want to do it. He was always complaining every day. He would complain about it. And so finally, Gordy was, it was after they'd already had a 96 album, which was not Heated, the one before that, Hemivision. They'd already had a Hemivision platinum record. Now they were just about to put out Heated, which would go platinum. So they were huge at this point, doing festivals and big shows and stuff. So I got a call from Big Sugar's manager in 1998, and it was Amanda was taking a year off to make her second record, and the manager, who was a great guy, Jeff Ireland, called me and said, Gordy's finally decided he's going to go with a real tour manager, and he's going to keep Luge on sound, but he just wants a separate guy to just tour manage. Do you know anybody? And I said, well, actually, I know somebody who isn't working right now. Yeah, me. So I ended up tour managing about half of the Heated tour. Um, and that was really weird because I was just tour managing. I wasn't doing sound. And it's like the, being a tour manager is hell until you actually get to spend 2 hours a night doing sound, something you love, you know? So it was really a weird experience doing it and not getting to do the sound either. So, but I did that for 6 months in '98. Uh, One notable part of doing that was we opened for the Rolling Stones at the ACC, and that was kind of cool.
Okay, so is that any different? I mean, you hear amazing stories about how well put together the Rolling Stone machine is.
Yeah.
But as an opening act, is it impressive to work with them, or
Oh,
is it not?
super, super great. They were really, really nice people. Yeah. So that was pretty easy. It was just a matter of getting a hold of their tour manager and saying, hey, I'm the tour manager for the opening act. And he would just say, yeah, whatever you guys need, do you want us to take up the carpet or you want to leave the carpet? And we're like, yeah, whatever, it was very nice. But the thing is, Gordy also had a relationship with Charlie. Charlie and Gordy were friends. Charlie used to call up Gordy when they would rehearse and say, come down to rehearsal. And Gordy would sit on a stool right beside Charlie and just watch rehearsal and stuff. And
Wow.
so here's an interesting story. At the time, it was Gary on bass and Rafa on drums. Now, Rafa Dean he's passed now, but he was this guy that Gordy used for all his recordings. Like almost every Big Sugar record from back in those days had Rafa on it. All the reggae stuff was Rafa. And I'd heard about this guy, Rafa. Like Gordy was like, oh, Rafa, you got to hear Rafa. He's amazing and stuff. But the only problem with Rafa was he was a bit of a crackhead. And so he'd already been in Big Sugar before. And I think Gordy left him at the ferry dock in Victoria because he was such an out there guy. But he still used him for recording and stuff. And anyway, so at this point, they'd lost a drummer. And I guess he thought, I'll give Rafa another try. So they had Rafa on drums. But I'd always heard about this guy. He was kind of like this legendary guy, but I'd never seen him. And so, Rafa's playing. Okay, so we went out, and I remember we were playing at not Stages, but AJ's in Kingston, AJ's Hangar, kind of a big bar. And Rafa was on drums. And within the first song, I just went, this guy is the best drummer I've ever heard.
Wow.
Like he had just had the most amazing feel, like, and he played so great. But the only problem was that a lot of times he couldn't remember the songs because he was kind of out of it and stuff. So we're on the Rolling Stones show and we're all in the dressing room and there's a knock on the door. Gordy had gone out of the dressing room to go to a bathroom or something, and the door opens, and it's Charlie. And I'm like, "Oh, hey." And he's like, "Yeah, I was just wondering if Gordy was around." I said, "Oh, he'll be right back. Yeah, come on in." I think he just went to the bathroom. Come on in, and and then you hear Gary over there, "Hey, Rafa, blah 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 blah," the Jamaican patois, that they had.
Yeah, yeah.
But he screamed, Rafa. And all of a sudden, Charlie, his head whips around and he goes, Rafa? Rafa Dean? And Rafa's like, yeah, man, I'm Rafa. And he's being a Rasta too. He's kind of like, yeah, I'm Rafa. What do you want? And Rafa Dean. Oh my God. Charlie was gobsmacked because Rafa had played on all these reggae recordings that Charlie loved.
Wow.
Like, because Rafa was just that guy. He was the recording reggae guy. Like, you could not get a better drummer to record, And Charlie was just falling over himself to say hi to Rafa, And
Oh, that's
oh my
cool.
God, it's an honor to meet you, and all this stuff. It was really funny, And there's Rafa, and Rafa's a crackhead, right? So it was, Gordy said he used to keep, the money in his pocket, and Rafa would come in, and would see the money in the pocket and he'd play better because, you know, it was like, okay, I need to get this money, but he wouldn't get the money till he'd done the session.
Right.
Right? But Rafa was a real, I mean, I don't want to paint Rafa in a bad way here either, because Rafa was a really sweet guy. And I spent quite a bit of time with him driving him home after I dropped everybody else off, and talking to him. He really was a sweet guy, but he just had a problem,
Yeah, yeah.
And
But you did also say that he was one of the greatest drummers you heard, which is
yeah,
quite a compliment.
but that's the thing, you always hear that and you go, oh yeah, right. But it was true with Ralph. He was amazing.
So at one point or another, you and Gordy moved to Austin, Texas, to
Yeah,
start the Grady band.
yeah.
Was that a difficult move or was that simple?
Well, it was really weird the way it happened because in after Amanda, I left Amanda and I said to myself, I'm not tour managing anymore. I'm sick of this. And then I sat at home going, what am I doing? Nobody just wants to hire a sound guy. They all want a tour manager sound guy. And the phone rings. I remember thinking that, and the phone rang. I picked up the phone, and it's Larry Wanagas, Gordy's manager. And he said, Jeff is leaving, the sound position, and he suggested getting you. He said, you're a fine sound guy, and Gordy said he'd be fine with it. You want to be the sound guy? I said, I don't have to tour manage? He said, nope. I said, I'm in. So I became the tour manager no, the sound guy for Big Sugar, and it was like the end of 2000, or no, it was 2001 is when it happened. And so from 2001 until the end of 2003, I was Big Sugar's sound guy. And so the thing would be on these tours, and me and Gordy still like to play together, and so we would do this thing. We call it Big Ben, and it was just me and Gordy, and we just hire a drummer, any drummer. It didn't really matter to us. Al Cross did it, Eric Paul did it, Nick, our monitor guy, did it. But we wouldn't rehearse. We'd just go to Grossman's. I'd call Grossman, say, we're coming in tomorrow. Can we come in tomorrow? And they'd say, yeah. And I had a list, and I'd say, okay, we're doing Big Band with Gordy Johnson from Big Sugar. And we'd pack the place, and we just play, for 3 hours and have a good time. And we did it at Grossman's quite a bit. We did it at Healy's. And then when we go on the road, if we had a day off, like I remember once in Saskatoon, Gordy said, hey, we got a day off tomorrow. Should we do a gig at the Odeon tomorrow? Do you think we can? And I call up Spiro, the owner, and I say, Spiro, can we come in tomorrow and do a gig? You can promote it on the radio, if you want, just word of mouth, what you can put on the radio. And, yeah, great. I say, you just get us a set of drums and a bass amp and a guitar amp. And then we do that, on a day off. And Nick, our monitor guy, would be the drummer, and so we just
What's it like to do that, to be able to call somebody and say, we're coming in, and then all of a sudden an audience shows up?
It's great.
It must be.
It's much better than having no audience show up, I'll tell you
Right.
that.
No, but I mean, just to have that power that, all of a sudden you show up and people are there.
Yeah.
Especially at the last minute.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It was, so we had a ball doing that. And then March of 2003, Gordy called me and he said, I'm making this record. He was producing a record for Caroline Néron, who's a French actress from Montreal, and she wanted to make an R&B record. So he told the record company, well, if you want to make an R&B record, you have to hire Chris Layton on drums. So they said, okay. And they flew Chris up to Toronto and put him up in a hotel for however long. So Gordy called me. He says, I got Chris Layton's coming in tomorrow, and I got us, we're recording this Caroline Néron record. Do you want to do a Big Ben gig at Grossman's tomorrow night? We'll do it with Chris so I can get him warmed up for the session. And I said, sure, no problem. So I called Grossman's. I said, no problem. So we go down there, and, Gordy had his crew, his two roadies, pick up all the gear at storage and bring it down to Grossman's and get it all set up. And we were it was like 10 o'clock. They still hadn't shown up, and they kind of waltz in about 10:15, and I'm like, hey, we better get playing here, Gordy. We're supposed to be on. And, yeah, yeah, okay, let's go. So we get on, and that's kind of where I met Chris. It was like, hey, how you doing? Like, nice to meet you.
Let's
Gordy
play.
counts off the tune, and but I had this little recording rig, an eight-track recording rig, and we could do it with Grady because we'd never had a big drum kit. We only had a very small drum kit, and I could record everything on 8 channels. So, or with Big Ben at the time. So I had my computer and my little interface, and I set it up so I could record the whole thing, and then I mixed it at Liquid and sent it off to Chris. Like, we played for about 3 hours. It was three
And what are
CDs.
you playing? What kind of music? What?
Blues,
Okay.
just blues or old Big Sugar stuff and just old blues, whatever Gordy would come up with, and I remember Chris kind of after the first set, we did 2 sets. We did like 2 hour-and-a-half sets or something like that. And Chris stood up and he looked at me and went, "Do you guys do this very often?" And I said, "Yeah, once every 6 months or so, And he was like, "This is cool." And then I recorded it and mixed it down and I sent it down to him. So next thing you know, he starts calling Gordy and going, "Hey man, you should come down here with Big Ben and come down for a month and I'll set some stuff up and we'll have some fun." So uh, Gordy calls me one day and says, what are you doing in August?" And at the time I was playing with Jeff too, but Jeff didn't have any gigs in August and Big Sugar didn't. So I said, "Well, I got nothing. You're not working and Jeff's not working. Do you want to go to Austin, have a holiday and like hang out and play with Chris?" I was like, "Sure, I'd love to do that." So we went down there and spent a month down there, kind of stayed with Chris, out in the country and rented a couple of amps and played, like, did a bunch of gigs. We every Tuesday night at the Continental Club, every Monday at Antone's, and then weekends Chris would fill them in with a few different gigs, and they just loved us. Like, the Continental Club crowd was crazy about us. Like, we were packing it every night, and it was fun. It was hot. It was 110 degrees, like, but I loved it. We were wearing the suits and everything at the time, and so then we were a couple of days away from coming home, and Gordy, we're having a beer. And I remember we were on the patio, on the poolside. Chris had this little pool, and having a beer, and Gordy just leans over and he goes, "If I broke up Big Sugar, would you do this? Like, move here with me and do this?" And I was like, "Yeah." And that's basically what happened. We flew back and we kind of started for 3 months. We did the Big Sugar farewell tour. I was doing sound. And before we started the Western leg, I packed all my stuff up in my apartment and got rid of everything and put a bunch of stuff in storage. And we went out all the way out west, did a bunch of dates out there, and ended in Edmonton, which was Big Sugar's biggest market. And it was 5,000 people sold out New Year's Eve. And then at the end of it, said, "Okay, see y'all later." And I was staying out in Red Deer with Gordy at their farm. And I remember it was so cold. We were driving to the airport. I think we had to leave at 4 in the morning or something like that. And it was so cold that the whole way to the airport, I was in the back seat of the SUV or whatever we were driving. I couldn't warm up the whole way. It was so cold. And so we get on a plane and we land in Austin. And I walk out of the airport. I got my bass in one hand and my suitcase in the other. And you walk out at 77 degrees Fahrenheit. And I just went, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to love this. I'm going to love it here." And I did. I just loved it. And I ended up, I ended up staying One of the waitresses at the Continental Club had a spare room in her house, and she told me in August, said, "Yeah, if you guys want to move here, you can come and stay for a few months with me." And so that's what happened. I basically, and then I just got into the whole scene and ended
Was
up.
that easy? Is it easy to get into the Austin music scene?
Well, it is if you've got Chris Layton,
Oh yeah, I guess.
like because Chris is a bit of a rock star,
Yeah, yeah.
and we won Best New Band at the Austin Music Awards that year, and things really were happening, and uh, and then Chris quit in at the end of 2005. He was playing with Kenny Wayne Shepherd, and we weren't making any money at all. Like we were putting all our money back into the band, to make records and do all that stuff, and that's where I mean, I had $3,000 in the bank. That was all I had, and we were taking all the band money and putting it into the band fund. And so it was lucky for me that I was a sound guy, and I got friendly with with the sound guy at the Continental. And I said, "Hey, I can do this if you want me to." And he was like, "Yeah, sure, man." And so that's how I kind of survived for the first couple of years, was mixing at the Continental and, doing freelance work basically. And we really hit it hard with Grady. We made 4 records, including the live one. And for 7 years, we really, really went for it. And then just
So,
nothing
what's the
more.
status of the band now?
We're not together anymore.
Oh,
That's
okay.
it. So
Is Big Sugar together anymore?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know how to put this, but I basically had a falling out with Gordy,
Okay.
and we don't talk anymore. So,
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Would you prefer that we just kind of skip this part?
well, I don't know. He basically, after Gary died, he asked me to, he basically said, "Well, join the band," and I did. And then the pandemic hit right as we were putting out the new record. We made a great record, and I got to play on it and everything. And it was fantastic, and I was so looking forward to getting out and playing the record. Like, let's go on tour. We were going to hit it hard, and then the pandemic hit. We released the record 2 weeks after the pandemic hit, and I've got this photo on my phone of the Dundas Square in Toronto. There's a massive billboard, Spotify billboard, and there's a poster of all of us, massive. There's not a single person in Dundas Square
Mm-hmm.
because of the
Right.
pandemic, right? And the album totally stiffed and everything. And then, and I was just like, what are you going to do, right? And so we're all living our lives. And then about a year ago, Gordy called me in and told me that he was going to replace me with Gary Lowe's son, Ben. And so to me, it was just a opportunistic move as far as I was concerned. After all the support and stuff I'd given to Gordy and his wife, and I just found it to be opportunistic, you know. He so I just told him to fuck off, and I never want to talk to him again. So, but that has made me rethink my whole attitude to the music business. It's like so. So now I'm trying to get out of the music business and do something different because I just can't be bothered. A 35-year-old friendship and that doesn't mean anything, compared to
Mm-hmm.
trying to make your band more hip and young. That's bullshit. So, and that's the music business for you. I've lived through it and I've been part of it, and I got really pissed off at myself for enabling this kind of behavior, you know. For, I'm the kind of guy that I don't see. I'm not a street guy, you know. I'm totally naive when it comes to stuff like that. Like I don't really see stuff. I always look at the best in people. I try to look at the best in people. I don't look at the bad side. I try to look at the best, and I always hope for the best for everything. And I think anybody that knows me can attest to that. I'm always trying to be happy and trying to do a good job and trying to be a good guy.
Well, I can understand that. So when you say you want to I should wrap this up. When you say you're thinking about getting out of the music business, what does that mean?
Well, I sold all my recording equipment and I sold all my basses except for two. And basically, I just want to go and do something else that doesn't involve, you know, I mean, I don't really have that many options. What am I going to do? I could start all over again at the bottom, you
Right.
know, or come back to Canada where I'm you know, semi famous and suck up to a bunch of bands to get a gig as a bass player. I don't really want to do that. I've done so much and I've had a great life. And let me tell you, like, I've had a wonderful life. People would kill to have the kind of life I've had. But then again, I look at it and go, well, I never really looked out for myself. That's the other thing. Like, I didn't look out for myself. I don't have a pot to piss in for retirement, because I'm a musician. I've never paid any pensions. And so it's just kind of a weird thing, and in a way I kind of, but on the other hand, I'm not complaining because I've lived a life that most people would love to have, or some people would love to have. I've had a beer with Slash at 10 o'clock in the morning in a hotel bar. I've met the Rolling Stones. Like, I watched while Jeff Healey grabbed Keith Richardson a bear hug while he was trying to put his pants on. And got basically blacklisted from the rest of the Stones tour. And I've done a lot of cool things. And I've had a blast doing it. I haven't had to work a regular 9 to 5 job or do all that kind of stuff. So I'm not complaining, but
Do you still have passion for the bass or
yeah,
to
I
play?
love music. I'll never not love music, but it's funny. It's kind of like, when the Phantoms broke up and people would say to me, don't you miss playing? Because now I was tour managing. I'd say, yeah, well, I don't really miss it that much. And I definitely don't miss hauling my SVT amp up the back stairs of the El Macombo for the 100th time. You know,
Right.
like, playing comes with a certain amount of, you know, work or a certain thing, and so it's not like I miss it. I mean, I went for years without playing or just playing for fun and then started Grady and then did that for 7 years. And then, like, it's all kind of interchangeable to me. And in a way, it's kind of fun because, you know, if I was only a player, then I'd be stuck in that kind of
Hmm.
thing. Whereas I can do other stuff and then come back to playing. And it makes playing more enjoyable in a way because all of a sudden, oh yeah, great, I remember this, and you don't get sick of it, and it's
Right.
hard when you're, as a musician, it's really hard to keep going sometimes because it's just a hard life. It's not an easy life unless you make it really big. You're struggling all the time and it becomes a grind. And when playing becomes a grind, then it's not that much fun. And playing should be fun.
Hmm.
That's what, with Grady and with Big Sugar, playing was so much fun. You know, I loved it, but, just in terms of, do I want to sit down and play some scales? I'm not really that into it. I never have been. I always just wanted to play in front of people. That was the thing. So I never really practiced a lot, and I don't even really consider myself a musician. Musicians are guys that understand music and know music and play scales and understand what a you know 13th chord is. I don't know any of that. All I know is that I started playing bass because I love just playing one note. you know I could play one note for an hour, and if it was a good drummer and a good guitar player, I'd be totally like, yeah, I got this one note. That's fun. Like, and I can also play, I can do complicated stuff too, but it's a matter of work. Oh, this lick, have to practice it for an hour before I get it, but then I'll get it. If I have to, I can do that. But it's not something that I automatically gravitate to. Oh, I'm going to do a bunch of scales now. Like I hardly ever practice.
Well, I hope you find that passion again, because
Yeah.
obviously, I always think of it as an amazing accomplishment that you could, that young kid who saw Johnny Winter and Edgar Winter and
Yeah.
thought, I want to do that, to somebody who has been doing that in one form or another all your life.
Yeah.
And I can totally understand why the music business and perhaps the people in the business can be off-putting, and it's a difficult life. But like you said, you've had the opportunity to experience a lot of things,
Yeah.
and you've also adapted throughout your life to do different things. So
It's
I
really
hope
It's
I
been
hope it
great,
works out.
and it's been great, and that's the thing. I've had a passionate life. I'm passionate about doing sound, and I'm passionate about playing bass, and I'm so lucky that I got to do that. I mean, right now I'm passionate about solar, and I'm thinking of trying to get into the solar industry because I'm passionate about it. I bought an RV, and I've outfitted my RV with solar so that I can run off all my air conditioning, everything I want on my RV. I can run totally off my solar. I never even have to plug in. I'm sitting here at my brother's place in Prince Edward County, and when I get off this, I'm going to go back to my trailer, which is totally air conditioned right now and is sitting at 96% battery, and enjoy my new trailer. But I'd like to get into some kind of a business with that because I'm really passionate about that right now. I love it. I just love it. And it was during the pandemic that, because I had nothing to do, I started getting into the solar thing and ended up buying this trailer. And I did everything. I did the whole thing myself using only YouTube videos. So
Wow.
it's pretty cool. Like, and I feel passionate about that right now. I'm sure I'll be passionate about music, too. I love, there's two acts that I really like right now. One is called Trio Mendelli, and they're these three cute little girls from the country of Georgia, and they sing in like Georgian or whatever the native languages, and they make YouTube videos with their iPhone, walking around the fields of their village, and they're just fantastic. And they're up to 1.2 million subscribers right now.
Wow.
Trio Mandelli, I love them. I love that. And then the other thing I love is Rammstein, who I'm going to see in September in San Antonio.
Really? I heard they were amazing in Montreal recently.
Yeah. So I saw them a long time ago in Germany when I was on tour there on a night off, and they just blew my mind. And then I kind of forgot about them. And then during the pandemic, I started watching their videos again. I was like, this band speaks to me. I love it. And part of the reason I love it, both these acts, is they don't sing in English. They sing in their own language.
Yeah.
And Rammstein makes me I'm just amazed. Like, they only sing in German, and they're doing arena tours all over the world.
Stadium tours
Yeah. All over the
Yeah.
world. And I just love it. I mean, I that's basically what I listen to now is Trio Mandelli and Rammstein.
Ben, I thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, well,
It's a real pleasure chatting with you.
well, I sure do appreciate the invite. And
thank you.
like I was telling you, that one with Michael Fonfara. Anybody listening to this, listen to the Fonfara one. You're never going to believe it.
On that note,
Talkin'
thank you
blues.
very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.